The smoke from the sick fires reached her long before the camp itself came into view, thin gray columns rising crooked into a sky the color of old ash. And Clara Whitfield did not slow her horse, though every sensible instinct in her told her to turn back before the sentries saw her coming. She had heard the word pass through the settlement at Miller's Bend 2 days prior, whispered between women at the well like something shameful. Fever in the Lakota camp along the Antelope River, whole lodges of it, warriors and elders and children alike burning with a sickness no one downriver seemed to know the name of. She had heard, too, the settlement's answer to that news, which was to bar their doors tighter and thank Providence the sickness had struck them and not decent folk. Clara did not share that particular relief. She had buried her own mother to a fever 11 winters back, had sat the whole cruel length of that dying with nothing but cool cloths and her mother's own whispered herb lore to fight it, and had sworn to herself in that grief-blind hour that she would never again stand by while sickness took what it wanted from people no one thought worth saving. She had tried 2 summers past to bring what little medicine the settlement fort kept to the same camp during an outbreak of the pox, only to be turned back herself at the treaty line by a captain more concerned with orders than mercy, made to watch from a hilltop as smoke rose over lodges she'd been forbidden to approach. She had never forgiven herself for obeying that order, and had promised, riding home in a fury of shame she still carried, that she would not obey it twice. When the second sickness came, she did not wait for anyone's permission this time, not the fort's, not the settlement's, not even, at first, the camp's own. The sentries saw her a quarter-mile out, 2 young warriors on horseback who crossed to block her path with expressions that held no cruelty in them, only a hard, weary wariness she understood completely and did not resent. She reined in and raised both empty hands. "I've come to help," she said, slow and plain. "I'm no doctor from the fort, and I've no claim on your camp's trust. I only know fever, and I know it kills faster when there's no one left standing to fight it." The younger of the 2 men said something low to his companion in a tongue she did not know, and the older one studied her a long, considering moment before answering in careful English. "Your people came before, when the pox took half our children a summer back, turned away at the treaty line rather than share what medicine they had. Why should we trust different from you now?" "You shouldn't on the strength of my word alone," Clara said. "I can only ask you to let me prove it instead." They did not let her pass the outer circle that first hour, and she did not press them, understanding that trust extended too quickly was worth less than trust earned slow. She sat her horse at the camp's edge through the better part of the afternoon while word was carried inward, and it was near dusk before a young woman came out to fetch her, face drawn tight with an exhaustion that told Clara everything she needed to know about how badly the sickness had already spread. "Our chief asks to see you," the young woman said, "before anyone decides anything further." Chief Waziyata lay in his lodge on a pallet of hides, sweat-soaked and fever-bright of eye, but even laid low by sickness, there was an unmistakable authority in his bearing, a stillness that commanded the small space around him without any need of raised voice or grand gesture. He studied Clara a long moment before he spoke, his English careful and unhurried. "You are the healer from Miller's Bend." "I'm no trained physician, Chief Waziyata. I learned what I know from my mother and buried her despite it. I've come only because I could not, in conscience, stay away while your people suffered a sickness I might know something useful about." "Your own people turned us away at the treaty line 2 summers past," he said, "when our children were dying of the white man's pox, and we asked only for the medicine your fort kept locked in its stores. Why should I welcome the same people back now, into the heart of my camp, at the hour we are weakest?" Clara held his fevered gaze steady. "Because I am not the men who turned you away, Chief Waziyata, any more than you are every warrior who has ever raided a settler's homestead. I cannot answer for my people's cruelty any more than you'd wish to answer for another man's raid. I can only answer for myself, and what I offer is this: my hands, my knowledge, and every hour I have left in me, freely given, asking nothing beyond the chance to use them." The chief was quiet a long while, his breath labored, his gaze never leaving her face. "My medicine man Tokala has fought this fever 3 days with willow bark and sage smoke and every remedy our people know, and still it spreads. He does not ask for help easily. I do not ask for help easily either, but a chief who lets pride bury his people for want of asking is no chief worth the name." He nodded slow. "Stay, work beside Tokala, not above him. Show me this trust is worth more than my caution." "I would have it no other way," Clara said, and meant it entirely. The medicine man Tokala received her with a wariness that softened only gradually, hour by hour, as he watched her work, not with any presumption of superior knowledge, but with a genuine, humble curiosity about his own methods that seemed to surprise him as much as her willingness to share her own in turn. "You use the willow bark same as we do," he observed, on the second evening, watching her steep the pale strips in water over the fire. "For the fever, yes. My mother learned it from a Shawnee woman who nursed her through her own girlhood illness and swore by it the whole of her life after." Clara looked up at him. "I expect there's precious little in this world that belongs to only one people, Tokala, fever remedies least of all." He considered that with the same careful attention he brought to every task, and after a moment wordlessly, showed her the particular way his own people prepared the bark, a method she had not known and adopted gladly, and from that hour forward they worked as true partners rather than strangers uneasily sharing a task, moving lodge to lodge together through the gathering dark, cooling fevered brows, coaxing broth into cracked lips, holding the hands of the frightened and the dying alike. Tokala taught her, over those long working nights, the proper use of sage smoke to ease labored breathing, and the particular prayers his people spoke over the gravely ill, which he explained to her plainly, and without any expectation that she adopt them as her own, only that she understand them as another people's honest reaching toward the same hope hers reached toward. Clara, in turn, showed him the fever-tracking methods her mother had taught her, marking each patient's condition by the hour so that a worsening case could be caught before it turned fatal. A practice Tokala found so useful he began keeping his own such records long after Clara's visit had ended. Neither of them spoke of it aloud, but both understood they were building something rarer than a cure, a genuine exchange between two traditions that had spent far too long assuming the other had nothing worth learning. She learned their names as she worked, not merely their symptoms. The old woman Mapia, who had outlived 2 husbands and 3 fevers before this one and fought this fourth with the same fierce stubbornness. The boy Hoda, not yet 10, whose mother would not leave his side and whom Clara sat with through a night so dangerous she did not expect him to see morning, and who did, astonishing them both. She learned, too, that grief and fear looked the same in a Lakota mother's face as they had looked in her own mother's face 11 winters back, and in her own, watching that death come, and that the sickness the camp fought made no distinction at all between the peoples. The settlement at Miller's Bend had drawn such careful, cruel lines between. Chief Waziata's own fever worsened rather than broke as the days wore on, his lucid hours growing shorter, his strength failing in a way that visibly frightened his people more than any other single sickbed in the camp. For a chief's death in the midst of such crisis threatened to leave them leaderless exactly when leadership was most needed. It was on the 5th night, the worst of the whole ordeal, that the fever in the chief's lodge climbed to a pitch that had Tokala's face gone gray with a fear Clara had not yet seen from him in all their long partnership. "His breath grows shallow," Tokala said, low in the lodge's firelight. "I have seen this before the end in others. I do not know what more to try." Clara knelt at the chief's side and pressed her hand to his burning skin, felt the racing, thready pulse at his throat, and understood with a cold clarity that they were losing him, that whatever combination of remedies had held back the fever's worst in other patients was not going to be enough here, not without something more. "The willow bark tea, strongest we can brew it," she said, already moving, "and every blanket off him, not on. We need to cool him, not warm him, however contrary that feels. Snow, if any can be found melting at this hour, or the coldest water from the river, clothes soaked and changed constant. We fight this together, Tokala, or we lose him within the hour, and I will not accept that outcome while there is a single remedy left untried. They worked through that night with a desperate, focused partnership that erased every remaining distance between them, Tokala running for river water while Clara stripped away blankets and pressed cooling cloths to the chief's burning skin, both of them murmuring low encouragement in their own separate tongues that needed no translation between them to carry the same plain meaning. Stay, stay. Do not leave us yet. Near dawn, with the whole camp gathered in anxious, silent vigil outside the lodge, word having spread of how gravely their chief fought for his life, Waziyata's breathing eased at last, his fever breaking in a great drenching sweat that left him weak but unmistakably, blessedly alive. Clara sat back on her heels, spent past words, and found Tokala's exhausted eyes meeting hers with something that had, some time in that desperate night, become genuine respect rather than mere tolerance. "You did not have to fight so hard for a people not your own," he said quietly. "He stopped being a people not my own somewhere around the second night," Clara said. "So did all of you." Waziyata's recovery came slow over the following week, his strength returning in careful stages, and it was during those quieter days of convalescence that Clara found herself drawn to his company beyond the plain necessity of nursing him well. He spoke, when his strength allowed, of his people's history along the Antelope River, of treaties broken and promises kept unevenly by both sides, of his own hope for a peace that did not require either people to disappear or diminish for the other's comfort. She found in him not the fearsome, simplified figure the settlement at Miller's Bend traded in over supper tables, but a man of considerable thought and patience, carrying the full weight of his people's welfare with a steadiness she recognized, having carried similar weight herself since her mother's death left her the only healer many settlers for miles could call on. "You could have stayed safe behind your settlement's walls," he said to her, one clear evening as his strength returned enough to sit upright and watch the sunset paint the camp gold. "Your own people would not have faulted you for it. Many would have praised your caution." "My own people's caution has never sat easily with me," Clara said. "I watched this whole territory decide your people's suffering was somehow less than ours, less worth crossing a treaty line to ease, and I could not carry that particular arithmetic in my own conscience any longer. I came because staying away felt like a kind of killing all its own." "You are not like the others who wear your people's face," Waziyata said, and there was something in his voice beyond simple gratitude now, something warmer and more considering. "Nor are you like the fearsome stories my settlement tells of your people around their suppers," Clara said. "I expect we've each been sold a poor account of the other, and I find I would rather trust my own two eyes from here forward." He asked her in the days that followed about her mother, and she found herself telling him things she had not spoken aloud since the funeral, how her mother had learned her healing craft from 3 different traditions across a hard frontier life, borrowing gladly from anyone willing to teach her, and how she had died anyway, despite every remedy tried, because some fevers simply could not be beaten no matter whose hands fought them. "I think she'd have liked you considerably," Clara admitted. She had no patience for anyone who thought their own people held the whole of any answer. "She sounds a wise woman," Waziyata said. "I am sorry sickness took her from you so young. I understand something of that particular grief now, watching my own people nearly lost to the same enemy." They sat with that shared understanding a long while, needing no further words to carry it, and Clara found herself thinking that this was perhaps the truest foundation any two people could build a life upon, not the absence of loss, but the recognition of it, held in common. The trouble, when it came not from the fever, which had by then largely run its course through the camp with only the frailest few lost despite every effort, but from Miller's Bend itself, where word had reached the settlement that Clara Whitfield had been nursing Lakota warriors for the better part of 2 weeks, and where that word had curdled, in the mouths of frightened and resentful men, into something uglier. A small party rode out from the settlement on the 10th day, led by a hard-eyed man named Garth Prout, who had lost a brother in an earlier skirmish along the river, and had never once forgiven the whole of the Lakota people for a grief that was, in truth, considerably more complicated than his simple hatred allowed for. "You'll come back with us, Miss Whitfield," Prout said, reining up at the camp's edge with 4 armed men behind him, "before these savages decide a white woman among them is worth more trouble than she's worth keeping." "These are not savages, Mr. Prout," Clara said, standing her ground with a steadiness she had learned these past 2 weeks from watching a whole camp face its own worst hour without ever losing its dignity. "These are people who took me in when my own settlement would rather have let a fever burn through an entire camp than risk a moment's discomfort crossing that treaty line. I'll not be dragged back to safety on the strength of a fear I no longer share." Prout's men shifted uneasily as the camp's warriors, alerted by the commotion, gathered at a respectful but unmistakable distance, weapons visible but not raised, a silent demonstration of readiness rather than aggression. It was Chief Waziyata himself, still weak but walking now under his own power, who stepped forward into the tension with the same quiet authority that had commanded Clara's respect from their very first meeting. "This woman saved the lives of my people at considerable risk to her own standing among yours," Waziyata said, his English measured and clear enough that no man present could claim to have misunderstood him. "If you have come to take her against her own will, you will have to answer to more than her objection. I will not stand by while a woman who showed my people more courage than your own fort managed in 2 years is dragged away for the crime of decency." Prout's bluster faltered under the chief's steady gaze and the camp's silent, gathered strength, and after a long, ugly moment of calculation, he turned his horse rather than press a confrontation he had plainly not expected to find so squarely met. "This isn't finished, Whitfield," he called back, though the threat rang hollow even to his own men's ears. "Miller's Bend won't forget you chose them over your own kind." "Miller's Bend can think what it likes," Clara called after him, unshaken. "I chose decency, Mr. Prout. If that's a betrayal in your accounting, I find I can live with the charge." She stayed at the camp a further month, officially to be certain the fever had fully passed, though both she and Waziyata had long since stopped pretending that was the whole of her reason. Their courtship, when it came, was built slow and careful across the particular divide the whole territory insisted on maintaining between their two peoples, conducted in long evening talks and shared work and the 1,000 small proofs of character that mattered more, in the end, than any single grand declaration. "I have watched 2 peoples fail to trust each other my whole life," Waziyata told her, the evening he finally spoke plain of his feelings, the 2 of them seated by the river as the last color drained from the sky. "I did not expect, at my age, with my people still grieving what this fever cost us, to find the one trust I did not think possible. I love you, Clara Whitfield, and I know the whole world beyond this camp will call it foolish, dangerous, wrong. I ask you anyway, because I have learned this past month that the things worth having are rarely the safe ones. I have spent my whole life being told what my people and yours are permitted to feel for each other," Clara said, "and I find, having buried my mother to a fever and nearly lost you to the same, that I no longer have much patience left for permission. I love you too, Waziyata. I'd like to stay, if you'll have me, not as a curiosity your people tolerate, nor a settler your people forgive, but simply as a woman who chose this camp and this man with her whole clear heart." They were married that autumn in a ceremony that honored both their people's ways, attended by a camp that had come, in the space of a single desperate fever, to regard the settler woman they'd once turned away at their outer circle as fully their own, and by a small handful from Miller's Bend, braver than Prout's faction, who had watched the whole affair unfold and decided, at last, that Clara Whitfield's decency was worth more to them than their old fears. Chief Waziyata took her hand before both gathered peoples and spoke words that traveled, in the seasons after, far beyond the Antelope River. That the truest peace between 2 peoples was never signed on paper alone, but built one act of courage at a time, by those willing to walk toward each other when every voice around them counseled turning back.